John McMullen's appearance brought to you by Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton. Online at GinoPinto.com. Gino's the winemaker's choice for 50 years.
Now, this is interesting. You just read that, and the tweet that came up was Nationals pitcher Joe Blanton is a devoted winemaker, and he has a new website for his vineyard.
How about that?
Timing. It's all about time.
We got a lot to dive into. Don't forget the Countdown to Kickoff show this Sunday, 10 a.m., live from McFadden's at the ballpark. Joe Kraus and John McMullen with all the latest on the Eagles and Cardinals. And, of course, you can hear that live right here on 97.3 ESPN. We got news today. Johnny Mack is, of course, the Eagles with the injury report. We know Fletcher Cox is out. But what is the feeling on Wendell Smallwood?
Well, the feeling is not good. He hasn't practiced at all this week. And generally, every once in a while, you'll see a veteran player who doesn't practice and they play in a game because coaches are comfortable with the fact that they understand what they need to do off the field. They probably grasp the game plan. But when you're talking about a young player, and obviously Wendell is only in his second season, it's extremely rare if you don't practice that you're going to play. So he's listed as questionable, but I would be stunned if he's out there.
This is one that kind of snuck up on everybody, right? Did he get hurt in the game last week and finish the game with the injury?
Yeah, he did get hurt in the game. And
real quick, is that one of the reasons why maybe Corey Clement was getting those carries late in the game?
It's possible. It is a good point. Still, it makes more sense for LeGarrette Blount to have gotten those carries, but nonetheless, it could have been Wendell. But nobody noticed him getting hurt. Nobody realized he was hurt until he didn't show up for practice on Wednesday. And, of course, Doug has been very short on Fridays this year. Another example of that today. And basically, when asked when he got hurt, somewhere in the four quarters. That's about what we got out of the head coach. But from people behind the scenes, it's swelling in the knee. It's not thought to be all that serious, maybe a week or two. But it's been an issue. We talked about it on yesterday's show with Wendell staying on the field. And that's part of, the one thing that I always refer to that Chip Kelly used to preach was the best ability is availability when you're talking about a player's skill set, because no matter how good they are, they can't help you if they're not on the field.
Yes, he was very short today, Doug. A lot of one-word answers. He actually said one of them was, "This is going to be short and sweet." And then the next question really was, what exactly is the knee injury? And he said, it's a knee, and he's questionable. Thank you. Thank you very much there, Doug. As you get to the end of the week here, I guess maybe, flying across the country, having to come back. Maybe he's working on a little lack of sleep. Not the cheery 3-1 coach you would think.
Well, yeah, and it's been that way, I think, overall. This season he's been a lot, more focused in his demeanor, and maybe that comes from last season. Maybe it comes from learning something and getting a little too excited about the start last season and seeing things go sideways. Wants to make sure everybody remains focused. He certainly gave me that perception in advance of the Chargers game. And I think it continues this week, and I think it starts with him. Maybe he realizes he kind of let up a little bit after the good start. So this is a tough league, and there's no gimmies in this league. It's not like college, as I always say, where you generally have a number of games on your schedule you kind of know are glorified scrimmages. That's not the case. If you don't bring your A game in the NFL, you're going to lose by and large.
He said if Smallwood's not out there, that it does not affect the running game. Do you agree?
No. Well, maybe not the running game, but the offense as a whole, certainly it affects because he's in the Darren Sproles role as the third down back. And he's clearly, when you talk about the other guys in this committee, he's clearly the best receiver. He's not Darren Sproles, but he's a heck of a lot better than LeGarrette, and Corey didn't really excel at that in his few opportunities in the preseason. So it certainly affects the offense. You can make an argument semantically that it's not going to affect the running game all that much. They can use the same runs with Corey or LeGarrette that they were using for Wendell. But, you know, he's better at certain runs than they are. There's no question. And certainly in LeGarrette's case, there's certain runs that he's better at.
So, John, if Wendell Smallwood can't go, which option do you like best of the availability out there? There's talk of Kenyon Barner and have him fill that role, or maybe call up Byron Marshall.
Well, when Doug did finally start to talk, he didn't seem all that excited about putting Kenyon Barner in that role just back. So I'm not sure you're going to see that. That would make the most sense if you just wanted to continue with the committee setup. They could also, you have to keep an eye on Destiny Vallejo. He's questionable as well this week. He's missed 3 games with a wrist injury. The domino there could be if he's going to be ready, if the Eagles think he's going to play and he's been able to practice in a limited fashion, all of a sudden maybe they can release Justin Hamilton and sort of do a practice squad shuffle and bring up Byron Marshall from the practice squad. That might be a way they can go because he played receiver at Oregon. He played on the Eagles, remember, late last season. So he's been here for a while. He knows the offense, and he's a good receiver.
Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. How about LeGarrette Blount? Does you think that streak continues of them feeding LeGarrette Blount early and them having success by pounding the football with Blount early?
Well, we'll say everybody's obviously going to pay a whole heck of a lot of attention to see if they can keep this running game going. And the Cardinals have certainly made notice of it. So I think they're probably game planning a little bit more for that aspect of the offense than maybe they would have been a couple of weeks ago. Statistically, they've been good against the run. So in theory, it's a little bit of strength versus strength. Although I think on paper, the Eagles' offensive line, I think that's been the key to it all. I think they're playing at such a high level. I'm not sure if they continue to play at that level that Arizona is going to have much success. So I think a lot of it depends on can the Eagles get to the second level, because the Cardinals are built for speed, and Deion Buchanan's going to be back at inside linebacker. He was a safety in college. You have Tyrann Mathieu, always up at the line of scrimmage, a very small player. And, hey, you saw LeGarrette last week. I mean, the one thing you can say about him, he's not easy to bring down, and certainly for not undersized players.
John, does Doug feel any differently this year at 3-1 versus last year when they were 3-1? 3-1 last year, 3-1 again this year, but does he feel any different?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody feels different, starting with him, and it has a lot to do with Carson Wentz and the situation. We've talked about it a lot. He was thrown in to the deep end of the pool last season. He wasn't expected to play. This time around, everything's been built around Carson Wentz. Everybody knew he was the guy from the offseason, from the start of this program for this particular season to right now. Everybody knows this is Carson Wentz's team. This is Carson Wentz's offense. Everything's been built around him to help him maximize everything he has in his toolbox. So the Eagles think they're much better prepared to weather any potential hiccups than they were last season. And then you don't have to deal with the 10-game suspension of Lane Johnson as well.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Don't forget to check out John during the Countdown to Kickoff show on Sunday at 10, live from McFadden's at the ballpark. Doug hinted at today, I thought it was an interesting question about Zach Ertz's success and how Alshon Jeffrey and the difference between having a guy like him as opposed to Jordan Matthews has maybe helped Zach become, I don't want to say an elite tight end yet, but definitely moved him up a tier.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt Zach's an elite tight end catching the football. I thought he was last season. I thought he was this season. But there's no question it's easier for him this time because of not only Alshon but Torrey Smith as well. Even though they haven't been as successful as you would like, just because of the style of receivers they are and their ability to run downfield routes. Nobody's scared of Jordan Matthews, who's a very effective player. He's a very good player. But everybody knew what he was, and they certainly weren't afraid of him going over the top. So it's just common sense. You have more traffic in the middle of the field, and that's where both Jordan and Zach Ertz excelled, so it made it much more difficult. Now you have to pay at least respect, even though they haven't put up the numbers you would like. Defenses have to respect veteran receivers, and that's opened up things underneath for Zach Ertz.
Hey, do you think Doug moves Alshon around? Do you think the Cardinals shadow him with Pederson? I think that's going to be an interesting chess match.
Yeah, I expect them to. That's generally what the Cardinals do, is shadow the best receiver with Patrick Pederson. And if that's the case, it's going to be a tough week for Alshon. It just is. You're talking about a 5-time Pro Bowl, so even more, a 3-time All-Pro. I just could be the best cornerback in football. And if he's not, he's one of the top 2 or 3. And everybody's going to have issues with him. And I think that's going to continue this week, and other guys are going to have to step up because there's a big drop-off after Patrick Pederson at the cornerback position for the Cardinals.
Hey, John, we keep hearing the name Andre Ellington, right? That's come up several times from several different people as I keep asking what's the secret weapon that the Cardinals are going to unleash that people don't maybe, it's not a household name. Is Andre Ellington going to be a factor? Is he a guy to be concerned about?
Well, I think you could see some, sort of fantasy football numbers from Andre Ellington because I think the Eagles have to be concerned, especially with what's happened with their secondary and the constant X plays, the explosive plays they've been giving up. You have to be concerned with the outside speed of the Cardinals, which is, Jim Schwartz called it a 4x100 team on the outside. I mean, they're fast. And even in the NFL where everybody's fast, they're fast. So that's the biggest concern. And if you're sort of playing too deep safety and keeping things in front of you, well, that's going to open up the flats for a player like Andre Ellington. But there's a certain, I call it Lou Holtzing. Obviously, the Cardinals were a lot more explosive, a lot more difficult to deal with when David Johnson was in the lineup, who's one of the best running backs in football. And the fact that he's not there, they're the worst team in the NFL in running the football. Yeah, Ellington can catch it a little bit, but he's not going to hurt you. So I wouldn't be all that concerned. He might catch 6 or 7 balls because that's who the Eagles want having the ball, and they don't want Carson Palmer going over the top necessarily.
Arizona seems, John, to have a pretty stout run defense. Is this a game that they need Stents to really win for them?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're 2-2, and if anything, it's been a disappointing 2-2. There was a lot of high expectations with this team, and people thinking maybe they could get back to what they were sort of in 2015, 2014, when they were one of the best teams in football. Obviously, the Johnson injury, as I said, kind of derailed that. I mentioned Calais Campbell. I think losing him, that's one of the true stars in this league that maybe a lot of people don't know about. He's just so quietly effective. I think they miss him. But they are getting Deion Buchanan back, and they do have some really good playmakers on the defensive sides. We mentioned Pederson. You also talked about Chandler Jones and Massout. They have some really, really good players. The question is, can they protect on offense? And I have not seen them do that to this point, and I don't think they're going to be able to do that in Philadelphia.
Hey, John, if J.J. Nelson questionable, John Brown questionable, but if those two guys are ready to go, there's a lot of speed, right? I mean, this is a tough matchup for this Eagles secondary. We've kind of, seen each week since Darby's been out, and then, they've kind of held it together. But you wrote about how they these late game problems that the Eagles have had, but in this kind of situation, there's a lot of speed on this Cardinals team, and they like to chuck it, man. You watch them play; they'll throw it down the field.
Yeah, they love to. That's what they want to do, and that's been an issue because obviously, if you want to use deep routes and they take time to develop, and that's the part where the offensive line hasn't held up, specifically on the outside with Jared Valdir, right tackle. If you're going to take 7-step drops and wait for guys to run 40, 50 yards down the field, if you protect, Carson Palmer's going to get him the football. There's no question about that. And certainly against this Eagles secondary. I mean, we've seen it. It's obviously the weakness of that defense, at least till Ronald Darby comes back. And Jalen Mills and Rasul Douglas aren't the fastest guys in the world. And that's just the reality of the situation. So I think the fact that Schwartz specifically mentioned how fast they are, and remember, you can't sit there and double team guys like Brown and Nelson because Larry Fitzgerald will kill you from the slot. So from that standpoint, it doesn't look like a good matchup for the Eagles. However, as I said, the part where they do have the edge is that Cardinals' offensive line has not been good at all. And all of a sudden, if you can speed up Palmer and get him off the spots, he can't take those 7-step drops. That's advantage Eagles.
Advantage Eagles in the spread, by the way, about a touchdown favored in this game. Obviously, we haven't talked about as much the team, traveling from Mountain Time over to the East Coast.
Hey,
but,
we love Mountain Time.
Arizona's coming across the country. But the last time they were in Philly, they bombed the Eagles here. But they have really not been the same team since that night. This is a team that's 10-13 since that Sunday night win. They've had all sorts of injuries. They're losing some pass rushers here, John, with Golden being out. Obviously, that's a big loss for them on the defensive side of the ball, even though he hasn't had a sack this year. Last year he was third in the league. They're going to miss their guard. They're going to miss their left tackle. Too many injuries, you think, for the Cardinals to overcome? I mean, the Eagles have their own injuries. Fletcher, Smallwood, we know Darby. So there's a lot of injuries in this game, but who's got more that they can't overcome?
Well, I mean, the Eagles have persevered better with their injuries than the Cardinals have. And I think that's an important distinction because, probably you have two players. You have Fletcher, who's obviously an all-pro level guy, and you have Johnson, but he's been gone for a while. You mentioned that last Cardinals game when they were here. The Cardinals were 13-1 at that time.
Yeah.
They were the best team in football. And if you remember, Mattau tore his ACL in the game. And that was sort of the start of the descent that eventually ended, obviously, in a bad way for the Cardinals. So they were a tremendous, tremendous team at that time. And sort of that injury kind of derailed things. He was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate at that time. That's how dominant he was. But if you just look at the two injuries of Johnson on offense and Golden on defense, that's tough to overcome. As I said, that's probably the second most well-rounded running back in football behind Le'Veon Bell and a guy who had 12.5 sacks. So we can talk about the next man mentality all we want, and every coach does it, but there's a reason starters are starters, and there's a reason stars are stars, and it's tough to replace stars.
All right, Johnny, with that being said, give us your pick for the Eagles and Cardinals Sunday right here on 97.3 ESPN. John and Joe have the Countdown to Kickoff show at 10 o'clock, McFadden's at the Ballpark. Should be a nice day out there, although there's a little rain in the forecast. Another factor. I don't think Arizona's played a game outdoors yet this year.
Yeah, that's part of it. As you mentioned, the travel's part of it, and the injuries, all that culminates. I think it's a different outcome. I got bitten for the first year I went against the Eagles, picked the Chargers. First time I got one wrong this year. I'm not doing it again. Eagles will find a way to win 23-17.
23-17. Johnny Mack here on the Sports Bash, his pick. And, of course, the Countdown to Kickoff show starts at 10 a.m. And the people out there listening, if you're going to the Eagles game this weekend, stop on out to McFadden's at the ballpark to see John and Joe live from 10 to noon on the Countdown to Kickoff. All right, John. Should be a interesting game. We'll learn a lot more about this team as you do every single week in the NFL, but this is one of those games, if you're building equity, you got to get this one here.
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's a home game against a wounded team, and that's why I said you got to keep that focus. You got to take advantage of these types of situations.
All right, John, we'll be listening on Sunday, pal. Take care.
All right, thanks, guys.